IsReal News Deep Dive: Antisemitism, Advocacy, and Philanthropy, a Community Reassessment. Debate is intensifying within Jewish communities over how best to respond to rising antisemitism and how philanthropic resources should be used. The discussion comes amid increased reports of violence, expanding online hate, and new high-profile campaigns aimed at public awareness. In recent weeks, a prominent public argument has emerged around the effectiveness of major anti-Semitism-focused organizations and advocacy strategies. Some voices have called for a shift away from large-scale spending on public awareness campaigns and toward investment in Jewish education, culture, and communal infrastructure. Others argue that defensive institutions remain essential as threats grow more organized and more dangerous. The issue is not new. For decades, Jewish leaders, writers, and scholars have debated whether combating anti-Semitism should focus primarily on external advocacy or internal communal strength. Earlier critiques questioned whether public protests, watchdog reporting, and media campaigns meaningfully reduced hostility, or whether they reinforced a perception of Jews as defined primarily by victimization. At the same time, defenders of advocacy groups have pointed to their roles in tracking hate crimes, coordinating security, and influencing policy responses. The current discussion comes as anti-Semitic incidents have increased in multiple regions, including North America and Europe, with authorities reporting both physical attacks and online radicalization. Jewish institutions in several countries have expanded security protocols, and governments have adopted new monitoring and enforcement measures. Philanthropic spending in response has grown, supporting watchdog groups, educational programs, legal initiatives, and public awareness campaigns. One focal point is the role of large national organizations dedicated to monitoring anti-Semitism and advocating for policy change. Critics question whether decades of messaging and data collection have slowed the spread of hate. Supporters say these organizations provide early warning, intelligence coordination, and protection for communities under threat. Another point of debate centers on public awareness campaigns. A high-cost national advertisement tied to the upcoming Super Bowl has drawn both praise and criticism. Supporters say the campaign brings the issue into mainstream public conversation and encourages bystander intervention. Critics argue that such efforts may oversimplify how anti-Semitism now operates, particularly among younger audiences and in digital environments, and may not justify the scale of philanthropic investment. The discussion also includes broader questions about the role of Holocaust education, memorialization, and survivor testimony. Museums, school curricula, and new technologies such as recorded testimonies and digital reconstructions have become central tools in anti-Semitism education. Some educators say these efforts remain essential for historical literacy and moral awareness. Others argue that exposure alone has not prevented the persistence or evolution of anti-Semitism, which now often appears in political, ideological, and online forms distinct from earlier eras. Political context is also shaping the conversation. In the United States and Europe, debates over Israel, nationalism, and minority rights have influenced how anti-Semitism is defined and addressed. Some commentators emphasize the need to distinguish between anti-Semitism and criticism of Israeli policy. Others argue that anti-Israel rhetoric increasingly overlaps with hostility toward Jews. Jewish organizations themselves reflect a range of ideological positions on these questions. Structural factors are central to the debate. Anti-Semitism today is not a single phenomenon. It appears across far right, far left, and extremist religious movements. It spreads through social media networks, encrypted messaging, and decentralized communities. Law enforcement agencies report that individuals can radicalize rapidly, often without formal group affiliation. At the same time, Jewish communal life in many countries has become more visible and institutionally organized, increasing both resilience and exposure. Philanthropy sits at the center of the strategic divide. Jewish communal funding supports security training, legal advocacy, education, youth programming, religious institutions, cultural initiatives, and public messaging. Decisions about allocation reflect differing theories of change. One approach prioritizes confronting antisemitism directly through monitoring, advocacy, and awareness. Another prioritizes strengthening Jewish identity, education, and community life as a long-term response. These approaches are not mutually exclusive, and many organizations pursue both. But the scale of current threats and the visibility of recent campaigns have intensified scrutiny of outcomes and priorities. What comes next will depend on several developments. Donor networks and foundations are reviewing spending strategies amid rising demand for both security and education. Public awareness campaigns tied to major events are likely to continue, offering a national platform but also inviting public critique. Research institutions are expanding efforts to measure antisemitism across online and offline spaces, which may influence policy and funding decisions. At the same time, internal Jewish debates about identity, safety, and public engagement are likely to deepen. Generational differences, political divisions, and changing patterns of religious affiliation are shaping how communities define priorities. Educational institutions, advocacy groups, and cultural organizations are all reassessing their roles. The core question remains unresolved: whether the most effective response to antisemitism lies primarily in confronting it directly, strengthening internal communal life, or balancing both approaches. As incidents continue and philanthropic resources are mobilized, that strategic choice is becoming one of the central debates shaping Jewish public life. You've been listening to Deep Dive from IsReal News.